because this Celtic Bronze Age culture is super artistically conservative while also being really innovative. So this sword, it looks like it's two pieces. There's the blade and there's the hilt, and there are what look like two rivets through it, which you'll see when you come in hand. Earlier examples of this kind of sword were cast in two pieces with this bronze. They were cast and then they were riveted together. We have archaeological examples of ripped out rivets. That's a really shitty sword, right? That only makes sense for you're thrusting. If you're cutting, it's going to break. So eventually, they started casting them in a single piece, but they kept the appearance to look like the old ones. So, what do we know about the martial traditions of this period? Almost nothing, right? In Northern Europe, this was prehistory. People were not writing. It was prehistory. There aren't written records until really area in their records. That was the Iron Age, anyways, 1,000 years after this. But their records were also highly biased. It's barbarians. When you look at this sword, you can hold it by the hilt. You are sword fighters. Do not treat these as swords. Treat them as historical artifacts. Please don't swing them around. Also, when you pick it up, if you're holding it like this on someone, this is your favorite example, says your name, don't turn around fast. Because if you stab someone with a 3,500 sword and they bleed on it, who knows what will be unleashed? It's going to be bad news. Things to look at on this sword. The original patina still exists on part of the blade. Bronze is an extraordinary material. And this thing would have been highly polished, extremely bright, and it was very high prestige. They were very expensive. So this belonged to someone who could afford it in Northern Europe at the time that Achilles was one. There is incised decoration along the blade, which, so we were at the Higgins Museum a couple of years ago, and there's just two pieces. There's
I think there's still waiting to be official.
good practice. So they have another one at the Worcester Art Museum. And I was asking Jeffrey Forgang, there, who's the curator, who's also the one who translated Meyer early on. Yeah, how they did this inscription or inscribing incising on it. He was like, I was trying to keep it. Now, I think that it's possible actually that they were using, you have to use something harder than the bronze, right? And bronze isn't that hard before you hammer it sometimes. So they might have been using a piece of like flint or obsidian or something like that. Actually would cut pretty well. Use it in a thing. You could use various to carve those. But look at the fineness of the detail on the decoration of this. And on the pommel, when you put this over, don't stab other swords. Be careful. Flip it over and look at curlicue incising and decoration on the pommel is extremely typical of this Bronze Age period. And there were a bunch of
It's present on the grip itself. There is basically no undecorated surface on the everything is covered with this extremely delicate, extremely precise line work that like is still kind of baffling.
It's, yeah, I wouldn't. It doesn't mean aliens did it. Craftsman. One other thing. When you pick these up and set them down, make sure that the point is the first thing that comes off the table and the last thing that comes off the table. If you pick it up and the point is down, you're putting all the weight of the sword onto the point, which eventually will damage it. So, pick this up. Yeah.
So one feature that we didn't point out yesterday, so as we were here a second time, note the hole in the pommel of this sword. It's still up for debate what the purpose of this hole was. I've heard some theories that it could have been a spot for inserting a stone of some sort, but I don't know of any examples where there's been a stone. It seems a lot more likely that maybe this was for a lanyard or for some decorative cloth element that would go on the end. Especially when you look at this, it's not a pummel nut, but this feature at the end, because it has this concave surface, it almost makes sense that there might be something wrapped around it. So you can imagine something akin to a sword knot or a tassel that might be attached to add kind of extra decorative flair.
Oh yeah, because this guy is fancy.
Yeah.
And if you imagine that being bright polished bronze, like a brightly colored cloth at the time, which also would have been expensive, would have shown off everything as he rode by on his chariot.
Coming forward to savage.
Yeah, exactly. This sword, the blade is a Viking period blade. This hilt is clearly something that Ewart added to it when he bought it in the 60s, so that people could hold it. It's wildly inaccurate. So this hilt has nothing to do actually with this sword. It's too long by at least an inch. There's all kinds of problems with it, but it means that you can hold it. Right? This is a river find, so we don't have provenance on it. It was probably dredged. A lot of them came out of the Thames River when they were dredged. The original corrosion has been left right here on one side. So that's how it looked when it got cleaned up and came out of the river. And they cleaned it by electrolysis bath. So putting a little electricity through it flaked off all the corrosion. What that did is allow you to see the way that this sword is actually structured and made. So during the Viking period, steel was very hard to make, especially in the Scandinavian lands. Most of the iron they had was bog iron, which was deposited in bogs when things died, right? So it's very low quality, and you get little steel when you do a Viking period smelt of this stuff. So steel is really expensive. Iron, they could make. So this sword is made of two different kinds of metal. The center, the fuller, right? So this groove is called a fuller. It's not a blood groove. And on this sword, it doesn't make it lighter. It is part of the construction of the sword. So they would take iron, they would draw it out into wires, which means pulling iron through dies of decreasing sizes to make wires out of it. Then you could forge weld together wires into various patterns to create the center of the sword, to which you would weld a thin strip of steel all around the edge. And so the thick part is essentially probably have the forge weld between the steel and the iron that's there. Now this was also decorative, super pretty, it was really important to, the kind of mythology of the period. You have all kinds of stories about, the worm's breath, the serpent in the blade, and all of that. It's beautiful. Pattern welded swords like this, call it, aren't actually stronger than steel swords. They were just stronger than iron swords, right? And they were a really good way to make a really good sword out of scarce resources. In Japan, I said this yesterday, there's a really similar problem, that very limited access to high quality iron ore, which made steel very valuable. And the highest quality steel is, like this made in a traditional way, is highly controlled, right, by the guilds who make it, because it is such a small proportion of the looms that you're producing. So they would use essentially iron in the back and the interior of the sword and make a taco of steel on the cutting edge of the sword. So this is one of the reasons you have multiple steels. Japanese swords, Japanese and Vikings, were in very similar positions. Technologically, to make excellent swords requiring huge amounts of skill because of a shortage of skill, essentially. Because that's human creation.
There's evidence of, especially for shield bosses, in like late migration era and early Viking age, of like a lot of trades of the Carolingians, because they had easier access to